Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm JR.
And I'm Grace.
And I'm Miranda.
Today we're chatting with Lane Akin, who's for 50 years as a law enforcement officer. He will talk about being a Texas Ranger, sheriff, and discuss the case of the 1996 murder of a 16-year-old cheerleader, Heather Rick. We will hear from his perspective as one of the investigators that worked on the case.
Lane served more than 50 years as a law enforcement officer. He began his career at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport with their Department of Public Safety in 1974. 2 years later, he joined the Texas Department of Public Safety. He served as a highway patrol trooper, a narcotics agent, Texas Ranger, and a Texas Ranger supervisor. Just prior to retirement, he was the supervising Texas Ranger lieutenant for Company B, northeastern corner of Texas. After retiring from the Rangers, he served as the Wise County Sheriff's Office enforcement captain. On March 1st, 2016, he was elected to be the Wise County Sheriff.
A native of Princeton, Lane earned a degree of science in criminal justice from Eastern Texas A&M. He and his family moved to Decatur, Texas in 1992 to serve as the Texas Ranger for Wise, Sac, and Montague counties. He was twice selected as the Law Enforcement Officer of the Year by the local county's Criminal Justice Association. In 2019, he was named the Wise County Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year. In 2023, he was chosen as the Decatur Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year.
Lane retired on December 31st, 2024. He published his first book in that same year, The Point of Dawn of the Texas Meth War. His second book is Texas Ranger, Wise County, The Relentless Pursuit of a Serial Killer. That was published in November 2025. Lane has been married to his wife for more than 53 years. She is the love of his life. She is the chief life officer and editor-in-chief for him. Lane and Kay are parents of 2, grandparents of 7, great-grandparents of 1. And welcome to the show, Lane.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
We had to get that in there, you know.
Yeah, this sounded great. Y'all have done your work. It was impressive. Thank you very much.
And just so you know, Miranda and Grace are the 2 students that are doing this podcast with me, and they are both criminology students at the Chicago school where I also teach. So they got the information about the case that we're going to talk about today. Tell a little bit about how you became interested in law enforcement.
I grew up in a little town on the eastern side of the Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth. It's called Rockwall. It was a great little farming community, and I really enjoyed growing up there. And my dad was a highway patrolman at that time, and so I watched all the stuff that he did, and I listened to the stories that he would tell with his highway patrol buddies, and it just captivated me. My mom was a school teacher, and she wanted me to be an accountant or a dentist. I didn't want to be a dentist. I mean, I know a lot of dentists and accountants, and I just think the world about them, but it's not what I wanted to be. But my mom was concerned because my dad was in danger, and plus he didn't make much money. So the reason that I ended up, going to of course, I could go on forever, and I know we're looking at an hour, so I won't go into all of those stories. But I was sitting with my father. I probably was about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 in the Yellow Jacket Grill in downtown Rockwall, the courthouse square, smallest county in Texas of 254, the smallest county in Texas. And I'm sitting there having breakfast with my dad, and he's probably going to drop me off at school, I imagine. And then the sheriff of Rockwall County came in. His name was W.J. Price. And I'd seen him and known him. But this morning, he came in with another guy wearing a coat and a tie and a big hat. And so when you look back into the east, it just looked like there was some kind of halo around this guy who walked in with the sheriff. And I was pretty dang impressed. So I asked my dad, I said, "Dad, who is that with Sheriff Price? Who is that?" He said, "Well, that's our Texas Ranger that's stationed here in Rockwall. Name's Charlie Moore." So that just really got into my head, and I watched that guy. I didn't know what Texas Rangers did. I didn't know what they were, and then all of a sudden I saw what a Texas Ranger is. And I tell you, it just stuck in my head, and much to the angst of my mother, I just really got that in my mind, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be like my dad, and then someday I was hoping that I'd have the opportunity to be a Texas Ranger.
That's a great story. I don't know about the halo part above the Texas Ranger, but that's okay.
It was just the way the sun was shining from behind him.
Yeah.
There was just a glow. Oh, they're not all innocent, I promise you.
And I know Miranda and Grace probably have a few questions for you, so I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah, absolutely. The case talked about the victim getting into risky behaviors before everything went down. Do you think sooner mental health intervention could have helped the victim from committing these risky behaviors?
Excellent, excellent question, Miranda. And that girl was 16 years old, Heather Rose Rich. And, she was a typical cheerleader, but she was a good kid. She really was. And some of the things that we see in Texas Monthly and other editorials that are out there about Heather, I think are a little overstated. There were a family, mother and father, good people, lived in a nice little modest house there in Waurika, Oklahoma. Of course, her body ended up in Texas. But she had three brothers. One was 23, one was 19, and one was 12. And they were a loving family. She really just made a bad decision that night. But your question about the possibility that counseling would have happened would have helped, because what she did, it was a mistake because she slipped out of the house that night. In fact, she had been suspended from the school because she was a cheerleader and just a gorgeous kid. It's just really tough to think about it. It's one of those things that just tears you up when it happens. So she made the mistake because she and her mother argued a little bit about her phone calls. This was a time when we didn't all have cell phones. And she ran up the phone bill about $300, and that was tough on them because they weren't making a lot of money. They owned a Subway sandwich place, and then the dad worked on the Highline wires. Lots of stories there that I don't think I could get into, but they were loving of their daughter. And so she was mad, and so she had the opportunity to slip out that night. So I think counseling, probably they didn't recognize that that was necessary. And I think if that had not happened, I think that Heather would have been just as great a kids as y'all are.
Did you notice any differences working with teenagers in an investigation, specifically like the interrogation process when you were interviewing all of the suspects?
Yes, it's tough, but this thing. I think the uh, population of Waurika at that time was about 1,500. I'm not sure about that, but about 1,500, 2,000. Small little town, great little town out in the middle, basically of nowhere. Probably about 15, 20 miles north of Texas and the Red River. But she went missing actually on the 3rd, October 3rd. She went out through the window on October 2nd, going to see some of her friends. One of them was her boyfriend. Of course, we didn't find her until October 10th, and that was when a rancher in Wise County saw something floating, and I don't know, y'all may know that story too. He had the former rancher who was probably, I don't know, maybe 70, 75, and he had his granddaughter with him. And so he was crossing over Belknap Creek, the backwaters of Red River, and he saw something floating out there, and he'd seen it before, so he thought it's just one of a calf that had fallen into the creek and drowned, and now it's floating. And so he had a 22 in the back seat of his pickup, and he stopped and he shot that what he thought was a calf, and the granddaughter said, "Hey, Grandpa, I don't think that was a calf. I think that was really a person." And so he drove away with his granddaughter, didn't call the sheriff's office until the next day. We, being the investigators on the Texas side of the Red River, we ended up in Waurika probably on the 11th because we had the autopsy. We discovered we discovered her body on the 10th. Her autopsy was on the 11th, and of course she'd been missing all that time, and everybody was worried, wondering what in the world happened to Heather because she was a treasure, even though the media doesn't show that to be the case. And so, just so y'all know, you talked about the two books that I've written, and they're nonfiction. I mean, they're fiction, but based on true stories. But this one, my third book, is going to be this story right here that we're talking about right now. It's obviously going to be nonfiction. So I'm kind of sharpening my memories of those things, and it was devastating for that community because she was so well thought of. She made the mistake in September when she was drinking as a cheerleader. So that's what sent her home, why they suspended her. She was going to be back in school on October 3rd, but on the night of the October 2nd, she slipped out going to see her boyfriend, and things got out of hand, and it turned into an ugly deal. So I go back to your question about all the teenagers, and there were so many of them. I think our class was maybe 35, something like that, and we ended up talking to almost every one of them. And you know what? I'm still talking to them now. I'm having some good conversations with those people as we go back, and you realize that Heather was basically a good kid, but had an argument with her mother, and she shouldn't have done it, and it cost her life. But most of those kids, except for the ones that we ended up finding out who were the actual killers, they were very cooperative, somewhat nervous because we had OSBI, which is Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. We had the Montague County Sheriff's Office, and the sheriff himself was there, and the FBI, and the lone Texas Ranger, and that was me. So we worked really hard for that 2 weeks until it finally broke. But in that time, I got to know so many of those kids, and the neat thing about the kids is you can detect if they're lying or not. They're so easy to see through. It's not like somebody who's been in prison; they're hard cased, and you can't really get beyond the facade that they put up. So those kids were mostly enjoyable, with the exception of two students there, and then the other one, the real bad guy, was a little bit older, and he wasn't in school.
So how did the case break? I mean, you say you guys, tell us how you ended up starting to identify the perpetrators, offenders, if you will.
Yes, of course. The first thing was finding the body in the creek, and then a big thing for me, and it's horrid to have to do this, but as an investigator, you want to be there in the medical examiner's office when the autopsy is done. And so there were some things we learned there during the autopsy. Of course, we didn't actually know who she was, but we had some dental pictures, X-rays from Waurika, and so the odontist there, forensic odontist, was able to confirm that was Heather Rose Rich, 16, cheerleader, good kid except for making a mistake. So he pointed out the roots of the teeth, how they were the same as the unknown and the known. And then, but the big thing that we saw there, Professor, was she was shotgunned 3 times with buckshot, which is a certain size, usually about 11 pellets in each shotgun shell. But the thing that really kind of helped us that day, and that's why I would go to the autopsies, because they had their weapons person there in the medical examiner's office, and he pointed out the wadding inside the shotgun. So if you can imagine, if you've seen a shotgun shell, it's kind of like a little tube, and there's a pad that goes down in there that pushes when the powder goes off, it shoves out the pellets. So the wadding, they call it the wadding. So the unique wadding of that shotgun shell it wasn't a cup, it was just a plain wadding. And so the expert there with weapons recognized that was Winchester shotgun shells. So two things brought it as we went through that process. So there were two things that specifically, but little brother that night on October 2nd, 1994, Adam is his name. He's a good guy. He's doing well. I had a conversation with him but just a few weeks or so ago. So Adam was in the kitchen when Heather was talking on the phone, and he could hear what she was saying. But then she told the other rest of the family that she was talking to another cheerleader. And so when we talked to that kid, he said, no, there was a boy on the phone talking to her. And he was saying something about how cute she is and maybe she'll come out and see him. And so that was the first thing. But then secondarily, we started looking and trying to find there are only a couple of stores that sold shotgun shells in Waurika, and lo and behold, one of those had sold 2 boxes, or maybe more like 4 or 5 boxes, because those shells come in five in a box, and they're very devastating. They're hard. They're really very explosive. So we went to the stores, and we were able to find that one store carried the Winchester double alt shotgun shells, 12 gauge. So that kind of sealed it right there because she remembered that two young men came in and bought the 4 or 5 boxes. I'll have to look at that, make sure I get that right. 4 or 5 boxes of that kind of shotgun shells. And we knew that she was shot 9 times. And there's only 1 or 2 kind of shotguns that shoot 9 at a time. You don't stop and reload. You got 9 rounds in there, so you can shoot 9 times continually without reloading. So we were able to determine that those were Winchester shells that were purchased there in that little hardware store in Waurika. And lo and behold, the woman who worked there said, yeah, there were 2 guys who came and got those. And those were a couple of guys that we knew through the school, and one was Curtis Gamble, and the other one was Josh Bagwell. Those were the 2 guys who came in and bought it. Josh Bagwell, he came from a rich family, and he used his grandmother's name to buy those, actually charged them to his grandmother, and so that her name was Patty Dale. And so the owner of the store called Patty Dale and says, is it okay if these kids are buying these double-aught shotgun shells? And she approved it. So they went out with those shotgun shells the day before that she was kidnapped and shot and killed. So that was it, Professor JR, that got us there because of Adam and those shotgun shells. And we're talking about the autopsy as well. It all came together at that very moment. So we really had a lot of loose ends we had to tie up.
So, did they ever explain why they did it? Their motive behind it?
Well, what they did, there were 3 of them. Randy Wood was the other one. Randy was the homecoming king. The game after actually she'd been shot and killed, and he was the homecoming king. He was a football player. So they wouldn't admit at first, and they didn't really. One, they were blaming the other ones. So Randy told us what happened in the interviews. I ended up doing the interview with Curtis, with an FBI agent. I had an FBI agent in the back seat with me. He was running the polygraph. We'd run a polygraph on him, and he failed it, that being Curtis Gamble, one of the most evil people that I've ever been around. So that kind of gives you an idea right there. So we came to find out, my goodness, there's so many tentacles to this thing. I'm sorry that I'm rambling on, but it was quite jumbled up at first, but it really became clear. We've got 3 guys because she slipped out of the house and she went to Curtis's house because he had the grandfather, Toad Anderson. He had a travel trailer outside, so they were a little partying out there playing dominoes, and they brought her into that house. When she came out, she walked there. It wasn't but about a half mile away. She walked there, and she was sexually assaulted, and then she got drunk first, and she was sexually assaulted, and then she passed out. So I go back to if they would say why they did it. They're all saying, well, the 2 of them were saying that it was Randy. It was all Randy. That couldn't be even further than the truth. And of course, that's the thing about being an investigator is basically you're going to find out that there are 3 things. You've got witnesses, you've got confessions, and you've got evidence. And only one of those 3 things does not lie, and that's the evidence. So it was pretty easy for us to tell, even though Gamble and Bagwell were blaming it on Randy. Randy was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. He should have stepped in and tried to stop it, but he didn't. And it was, all in all, it was just a shame because she was passed out. They drug her out of the back seat. Randy stayed in the truck, and Bagwell and Gamble shot her and killed her and threw her over in the water. So the person who owned the shotgun was Gamble. And guess what? It's a Ruger, and it shoots 9 shells without being reloaded. So it all came to pass. And in our interview with Gamble, he ended up confessing but blaming Randy. Randy's in prison, about 65 miles northwest of where I am right now, and I'm planning on going to see him in the coming weeks as I get ready for this book. But the 2 bad guys, no doubt, were Gamble and Bagwell, and Woods was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So, I'm looking right now. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but it says that Gamble is eligible for parole this year. My question is, why is he the one that's eligible 10 years before the other 2?
Yeah, so that's exactly right, and that really upset Waurika, and the prosecutor's working with me on this case. So in reality, he's got another capital murder or another murder case coming up right after that. So that's stacked and it's not concurrent. So he's gonna have to have another 30, 35 years. Then he'll have the opportunity. And they don't put that on there that this other one is waiting because he had two different life, and the other guys just have two life sentences.
That makes sense.
That makes us feel better, doesn't it?
I mean, yeah, I was looking and I was very confused because I
I
was
know
reading the
that's
descriptions of
really
all of them, and I was like, "He doesn't sound
yeah.
all that
I
great."
have caught a lot of questions from folks up in Waurika
Mhm.
because they're
And
kind of concerned to that too. And that's a good question. Thank you for asking it, so that everybody will know that.
and also I w just because somebody comes up for parole, it doesn't mean they'll make it. I
Yes,
mean,
very
yeah,
good.
you could be eligible for parole this year, and then the parole board could say, "No," and then you may not then you may have to wait another 5 years before you come up again or whatever. So, a lot of times when you have a case like this, and you do come up for parole, hopefully the parole board is sensible enough to go, "No, not the first time around. We're gonna you haven't served enough or you haven't, based on the crime." So,
That's why they call you professor. You're exactly right. You're exactly on point. Because it's scary when people see that. The family sees that somebody's coming up for parole. But the way the professor talks about it is exactly right. I wish everybody knew that.
So it said that Gamble was already an aggressive individual, and you confirmed that. Do you think the death of his friend pushed him over the edge even more and acted like a trigger to initiate the assault and murder? Or do you think that's just the type of person he already was?
Well, very, very good question. And I'm glad it's obvious. I think that I forget what the guy's name, Moss. I think his name was Moss, who his friend was shot and killed. He used that as an excuse, but something happened earlier than that he didn't talk about because he was in juvenile custody in Oklahoma for quite some time. And we did a little research, especially the prosecutor did a little research on his name is Tim Cole, one of the best prosecutors I've ever been around. That trial was something. But Tim Cole got in contact with the juvenile place where he was in being held. He told some folks that he was jailed with, basically. He's being detained with some people, and he had told them that he had always had a dream, and this dream came forward to us after the trial. He had always had a dream that he would shotgun to death a beautiful blonde-headed woman. And he'd always wanted to do that. It's just been his dream that he wanted to do that. So that's really what it was. He tried to throw it off on other things, but when we have that, in fact, I've got a statement here from one of the guards that points that out prior to Heather was shot and killed. So that was set up. That was set up because, and this is I think is going to be enjoyable about so to speak. I think it'll be interesting in the book. The way that this came about, we didn't know about it until after the fact. And therefore, Texas Monthly and the other periodicals that put some stuff out there just saying that she's a bad kid. She was doing a lot of stupid stuff. And I look back when I was a teenager, I was doing some stupid stuff, but I lived through it. And had she lived through this, she would have been probably just as good a kids as y'all are.
yeah, I've done a few stupid things in my time, and I can't say all of it was as a teenager, but, it shouldn't have cost her life, period,
No,
and
no,
they shouldn't have done what they did to that young lady either.
yes.
They were old enough to know better than do that. I think that was their goal. I think maybe not to kill her, but I think definitely their goal at first was to get her drunk, take advantage of her, and then based on what you said about the dream that he had, then that came to fruition.
Well, and so what he was doing, he being Gamble, he was telling the other two guys that, "Hey, she's gonna snitch on us. She's gonna say that we raped her, so we've got to get rid of her." And so that took him through his dream right there. He convinced them that's what they needed to do.
Do you see a lot of sexual assault cases where they end in murder due to the fear of the victim talking?
I didn't have that happen too many times as a Texas Ranger or even as a sheriff. I don't really recall those now. We had a pretty bad one, and it's coming up for a trial right after Easter. And this kid was 7 years old. Athena Strand was the name of her. She was hijacked by a delivery driver. He was delivering a package to a house and he kidnapped her and then ended up killing her. And I think that there could have been something there because he knew he couldn't let her go because she would go running back to mom and dad. So that's the only one that I remember, Miranda. that was that way. There were a lot of sexual assaults. Generally speaking, well, no, there's some others, but they were killing. They were killing because that's what they enjoyed, and it wasn't that they're trying to cover in their tracks, but they did try to cover their tracks. But being part, killing them was part of the thrill for those people. And it's just all in all, it's an ugly situation. And I hope that y'all are always safe and careful when you're out and about. Stay together in groups as much as you can. Just be careful. Back when I was sheriff, I taught that quite a bit about making sure people are safe as much as possible.
And, I think that's a good thing for anybody to know. After that, after how many let's see, how many years did you spend as a Texas Ranger?
Well, I was 16 years as a ranger, 50 years law enforcement in all, and my last 12 were in the sheriff's office, and the last 9 were as the sheriff.
And what made you continue with the law enforcement career as a sheriff's deputy and then the sheriff after having your time as a ranger? I'm assuming you retired as a Texas Ranger, and then you went back into law enforcement to do more. What prompted you to want to be from a Texas Ranger to the sheriff's department and then eventually the sheriff?
Well, so, actually, I was a lieutenant in the Texas Rangers, and I was enjoying it. I was supervising. I was, checking a lot of reports, and, um, I wanted to be a captain. The only reason to be a lieutenant, be a captain, and so I recognized I wasn't gonna have that opportunity, but I was 51 years old, and it was a time that you gotta make a decision. You're gonna stay on and promote more or what, and then I got a phone call from, and I wasn't looking for a job. I really enjoyed the Rangers. It was great, but I got a phone call at my desk, at my lieutenant's desk in Gallup. The guy on the phone says, "Hey, we've been talking about you and wondering if you want to take a job with AT&T." And I had no idea of being at the police, telephone police. I wasn't interested in that, but they offered me something that I never thought that I would imagine could be worthwhile. So I struggled with it, and that was in April of 2003. I struggled with it because I really loved the Rangers and I wanted to stick with the Rangers, and I couldn't make up my decision. And we were raising a granddaughter at the time, and I couldn't make up my mind. And she's sitting in my lap taking her bottle, and I'm watching the Ranger baseball game while she's taking her. And I'm thinking, should I retire? Should I not retire? Should I? Because you make two salaries then. I put my chin on her head. She'd fallen asleep, and I'm thinking, what should I do? What should I do? Then it dawned on me, this precious little girl sitting in my lap. And I think this will give me an opportunity to help her and the family more than we've ever been able to based on income. And it's just one of those things. And I took it. And then about 8 months later, I'm visiting with a prosecutor down in Hill Country, Texas, beautiful part of country. If you ever come to Texas, come to Llano or Fredericksburg, Texas. And I was sitting around a fire pit with the district attorney down there. He had like 7 counties. Sam Oakman is his name, and we were sitting around the fire pit, and I was visiting with Sam. Sam asked me, he said, "Lane, why did you leave the Rangers?" And I told him just what I told you. And then he said, "Well, do you miss it?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." He said, "Well, why do you miss it?" I miss it. I miss being a Ranger because I don't feel like I'm making a difference anymore with AT&T. It's a good job, but I didn't feel like I was helping anybody. And that district attorney said to me, Sam, he said, "Lane, if you want to make a difference, become a sheriff." Become a sheriff in a sheriff's office in a county of less than 60,000 people. And that, man, it hit me like a rocket, and I couldn't get rid of it. And so I went and talked to the sheriff here in Wise County, which was probably about 50,000 people at that time. It's bigger now. David Walker's his name. And I said, "David, you ever decide you're not going to run again, let me know." And so he told me he was going to step aside and let somebody else run. And I came in first as a captain, and then I ran for sheriff. And it's the best job I ever had. And I never expected that was going to be that way, because in a sheriff's office in Texas, you don't answer to anybody but the citizens. And the citizens expect that you're going to adhere to the laws and the rules and regulations. It was so nice not having petty politics hoisted upon me like it did even sometime, and I fought it with the Texas Rangers. But being a sheriff, you can do it the way that it's supposed to be done, by the Constitution, the rule of law, the penal code. So, listening to Sam, I couldn't help but step in and try to run as sheriff, and lo and behold, they voted me in 2016, and then I retired at the end of 2024. Ranger job was a good job, but the sheriff's office job was much more meaningful, making a difference.
I know you guys got some more questions. I got him off on a little tangent there, but you can go back to the case. It's fine.
Is that why this case in particular was, I guess, more meaningful for you? Is because you like making that type of impact? So working with teenagers during this case, is that why it kinda was more impactful for you?
Well, as I've said so many times, when I was a sheriff as well as when I was a Texas Ranger, one of the most important things we do is interact with our youngsters. I spend more time speaking to school kids than I do talking to the bad guys, especially back when I became the sheriff. And that was always very meaningful. And it's so nice because here, still kind of a small community. It's really nice that you run into people in Walmart or wherever it may be, and they say, I remember you came and you talked to us. And even a couple of kids who played on the football team with my son, jail because they committed armed robbery. And I hated that. They were good kids. But after they went to prison, it was armed robbery. They ended up going to prison, but they came back and I crossed paths with both of them. And they said, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. It was straightening me up. They weren't in prison for a long time. So those things make you feel as though you're making a difference. And my wife is a retired teacher, and I see the same thing with her, touching the children, the coaches, the way that they do affect them is so meaningful. I look back to the football coaches and the teachers that I had and the law enforcement, Charlie Moore, the sheriff that I saw, they mold the kids who are coming up. And I love seeing the youth here. And I love to see that y'all are having this interest in law enforcement because we need solid people in law enforcement because we can make a difference, because we can actually, so to speak, touch these children, these youngsters, and send them down proper paths. And they're so often, and I had to put 2 sheriffs in their own jail when I was a Texas Ranger, and it just bothers me so much because when you put on that badge, you have got to be trustworthy. And if you can't be trustworthy, you're not going to be able to do the job, and nobody in the community is going to respect you. And it's not always easy, and that's one of the things when I first became sheriff, I knew because there were people who donated to my campaigns. There were people who were gonna think and they would think because, okay, I donated to his campaign, so if we have some problems, he's gonna fix it. Well, no, that's not the way it goes. We're gonna go by the law, by the Constitution, by the rule of law, by the Code of Criminal Procedure, by the Texas Penal Code. We're going to go by that. And some of those people really got upset with me. Well, hey, I donated to your campaign. I know you did. And I think you donated to my campaign because you wanted somebody who's going to be honest and forthwith on what they do in law enforcement to make this community better. And as time went on, they didn't ask me to do something that I wouldn't do for somebody else because they knew that I was going to do the right thing. And so when the second term came up, they supported me then too. They were disappointed at first and they were mad at me at first, but when they realized that I'm telling them the way the law is set, this is the way we need to do it. We've seen too much corruption in law enforcement. And I really think as a youngster, I saw a lot of it, improper procedures by law enforcement. But what I see now, things are improving. And I think a lot of that has to do with the body worn cameras and other things, but you just got to have good people in those positions. You got even more so the leadership has got to be that because I've walked in. I'm sorry, I'm rambling here, but I've walked into so many sheriff's offices as a Texas Ranger, and when I met the sheriff, whatever his deal was, oftentimes their improper things that they were doing, all of the folks within that sheriff's office, they want to be like the sheriff. And the sheriff has got to set the tempo so that they know to do the right thing at the right time for all the right reasons. So, did I answer a question or I just ramble on? I don't know.
No, you answered
You
that.
answered the
It's
question and rambled a little bit, but that's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay.
I have a bad habit of that. I just get excited because it's so important what y'all are doing, and I'm glad that y'all are studying what you're studying. You're gonna make a difference as time goes on. And I'm really happy for y'all, and I'm glad that the professor called on me and gave me this opportunity to talk to the kids, and hopefully it's gonna really affect a lot of folks out there who want to move into law enforcement, criminology, whatever the case may be.
Okay, got some more questions. Let's go, Miranda.
Can you talk a little bit about how the families of the boys reacted after everything was going down?
Yeah, I like that question a lot. Your kids are amazing. So it was kind of unusual because you wouldn't think that this would be the case, but every one of those kids were raised by their grandmother. It really surprised me. And the parents of those children just kind of disappeared and didn't have anything to do with them. And that really could have saved Heather Rich's life had their kids been a little more understanding because they've got good parents. And that's what we're talking about right here is that we want to do good things. We want to show them the right way. Go back to your question, Miranda, please.
I was just wondering how the families of the boys reacted and their responses to the whole situation.
The Gamble had almost nobody there. The family didn't even want to talk about him. They knew that he was evil from the time he was a little kid, and I hate that. I hate that he was that way. But had he been transferred from juvenile to the big prison, she would still be alive. So sometimes we have to put those people aside. So his parents were not anywhere in sight. I spent some time with the grandmother. She'd given up on him. She was glad to see him, basically glad to see him go. Randy's folks, the mother was somewhere around. The grandmother was, I think she worked at the school, and I ended up visiting with her. She was way disappointed and hurt, but she was at the trial and she understood what was going on. She knew that her grandson had done some bad things, and so they were very understanding. She was very understanding. Now, Bagwell, his grandparents just thought the world of him. He was spoiled rotten. In fact, when we arrested him that night, after it all kind of fell in place, we had Gamble first, and then we had Bagwell second, and then we ended up with Wood. Got them all three in jail that same night. But when I went and knocked on the door of Bagwell's house, grandmother came to the door. She opened the door, and I had an Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigator guy with me, and as well as an investigator from the DA's office. And I told her we were here to arrest her grandson. And she didn't really say anything. She came in and she pointed to the door where he was, and I reached to open the door, and the door was locked. And I told her, I said, the door's locked. Now, of course, I'm sure we could have gotten in, but we didn't want to break the door or anything. So I said, you got a little key to open this? And she did, and she opened it and went inside. And there were weapons all around the walls in there. And we got him out of bed, and I'll never forget, he said, you guys stand outside while I get dressed with all those weapons inside. No, sir, that's not the way it works. You get up and get dressed right now. You're going with us. We're not going to step outside. So we put him in the right front seat of my car, and the other two guys got in the back, and we got him cuffed up. And Bagwell, I'm talking to him like an interview guy because we want to get to the bottom of all of this, give everybody a chance to talk. And this is the first time we've talked to him. And I said, I know this has been a tough 2 weeks, and it's been hard. And I'm sure that you're having trouble sleeping. And it's a dang shame what happened. And I know that you want to make sure we get all this straight. And I said, and I just now noticed that you're just really having trouble with all the difficulties. And I'm sure it's been messing with your mind. And so let's talk about it. And he said, you just woke me up. Did it look like I'm bothered about anything? And man, my ears turned red, and I wanted to yell stuff, and I wanted to slap him upside the head, but that's not what real law enforcement does. But we took him to the jail. And then his mother, who was an attorney, in fact, he said it sitting in the seat in my car. He said, I'm not going to say anything. You take me to jail, and I'm going to call my mama. She's an attorney. And so she came, and she was raised in hell. It wasn't in Warwick. It was the county further north. And she showed up and was throwing a fit. But the sheriff's office wouldn't let her in, and she's saying, I'm an attorney. I can do whatever I want to do. Well, they didn't allow it. And so the mother and some of the family, the grandparents, they really hovered over him, especially during the trial, but he stayed in jail the entire time. Well, during the trial, they were all there, the family to him, and they were all saying that he was innocent. It didn't happen the way they were saying. So much so, the last day of the trial, they brought his vehicle, which was some kind of a sports car that was really expensive. I don't remember what kind it was, but they parked it right outside the courthouse. and they had all of these little flyers on it, and they'd written on the side of it, "Welcome home, Josh." And so the trial went on, and they had closing arguments. The jury went out, and they thought about it for probably 30 minutes or so, and they come back and they find him guilty. And then they do the whole thing about the sentencing, and they sentenced him to life. So they left in a huff, and somebody else had to drive that vehicle home. So they really watched after him, so much so that his mother ended up getting put in jail herself. An attorney, she got put in jail herself because she somehow got a hacksaw to Josh inside jail so that he could maybe escape. So you got two different situations there. Mom was carrying, and the grandparents were caring about Josh, but the other ones that, they were just, and really Randy's, that grandmother, she was a janitor at school. And she was a kind soul, and I'm sorry that she had to go through that, and I'm sorry that Randy went through that too, because you couldn't help but like that kid. He's a good-looking kid, good football player, the best student, but he had a lot of good things going for him. He just got in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he lied to us too several times. He could have saved his time, really, had he told us the truth up front. And I was the one who talked to him and brought him off the football field, practice field, and you could tell he had everything memorized. He wouldn't give it up, and until we had everybody else, kind of cornered. So the parents and the grandparents were mostly gone, and not much help, and they weren't concerned about their kids, unfortunately. So all in all, I think we made a little difference. Another question?
One of the things that I wanted to say was I can't believe that she snuck in a hacksaw to her son being an attorney, because if she, got caught and got convicted, that kind of ruins her for being an attorney as well, I
Yes.
think, right? I mean,
It did, yeah. So she lost her
yeah,
license. In fact, she ended up being in jail for a while.
yeah.
I was gonna kinda add on to that because it's interesting to see how, like, Josh, specifically growing up wealthy with his grandparents, how you can kinda just lose everything because of the people you're surrounded by, or, the things you do, but I feel like that was also kind of his downfall too, is because he never, I mean, for what I'm reading, he wasn't disciplined at home, he never had to take any accountability for anything, so I kinda think that was also a part of why he's in prison now.
Very good. I like that observation. You could probably help me in the book some.
Yeah, if you need any help.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about the 2 books you have out? And we already know that this is gonna be one that's gonna be coming out later, but, tell us a little bit about those 2 books, and also, tell us where people can go get them if they need to, if they
Yeah,
want
so
to.
very good. Thank you very much. Thank you for that opportunity. So this is the first one. And so it's The Point, Dawn of the Texas Meth Wars, and you can find it on Amazon with Lane Akin. So methamphetamine was a huge problem in Texas and still is. Not as much so now as it was a couple of years ago. But methamphetamine at this time, this is set in the 1980s in East Texas, which is where I was working undercover as a narcotics agent when I was a young man. And it was unbelievable, the evil that through that group of people. It's just a whole new society, sub-society of those who were manufacturing methamphetamine. And so it's a true story, but it's based on true stories, but it's fiction. So it was fun to write. I actually started writing that in about 1983 or 84, and kept my notes. And then when I was getting close to end of my sheriff time, I thought, okay, I'm gonna put that in book form and see what happens. And it. It worked out pretty well and filled in a few gaps because I was making notes of all the undercover things that I was doing at the time, all in East Texas, and the methamphetamine, the laboratories that were popping up and we were knocking down. So it was an ugly time, and it's a difficult book to read because it's rough and tumble. It really is. So there's a sequel to that. Both of them are on Amazon, and this one is the Texas Ranger, Wise County, which is right here where I am, and it's the relentless pursuit of a serial killer. And again, a true story, the relentless pursuit of a serial killer who came through Wise County and actually had an aggravated robbery up near Wichita Falls and one right here in Decatur. And I knew the people who owned the store. And so it took us probably about 2 months to find the guy who did that. And lo and behold, and if y'all want to look it up, it's Springfield 3. is something that you can find, because this guy apparently was involved in several murders all across mostly the southeastern part of the United States. He never owned up to it and probably never will. So the interesting thing about that deal, when we got him on the robbery deal, he and I, we kind of worked well together. We had a little fondness of each other. I mean, he's an evil guy. He's not as evil as Gamble, but he's evil. Robert Craig Cox is his real name. I've got a different name in here. He and I really love Tom Clancy books. And I don't know if y'all know that guy, but it's a great series. I don't know how many books that he's written, but golly, I loved him. And lo and behold, he was a big fan of Tom Clancy. And the day that we arrested him, we got to talking about that. He wouldn't say anything to do about the robbery or anything that he may have done wrong. But if you want to talk about Tom Clancy, we'll talk. And so it worked. And we talked and talked and talked. And so we had a trial, and he ended up being found guilty. And so the next day, there's going to be the sentencing. And in sentencing, we had a prosecutor coming from Florida, where he had been because he had murdered a woman there. And then there was another prosecutor coming from California because he kidnapped a woman there. And so those two people were coming to testify. And the night before, the jailer here in the Wise County Sheriff's Office gave him his plastic razor blade to cut his beard so he'd be nice and clean when he goes into the court next day. And the jailer doesn't go back to get it, and he forgets about it, and he breaks it all apart, and he cuts his wrist all the way to the bone. And so they call me. It's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I get my Ranger regalia on, and I drive to the little hospital here in Decatur. And they've got him handcuffed. His left hand's handcuffed to the safety rail. The other one's over there, and they're trying to stop the bleeding on that. And I'm talking to him, Jimmy, what in the world are you doing? You're pretty serious about this. And why'd you do that? And he said, I didn't want to go back into the courts tomorrow because I didn't want to hear what those people are going to say, and I just didn't want to hear it, and I didn't want to do it. That's why I cut my wrist, and I didn't want to go back. And then he stopped and he said, because there had been investigators come from all over the United States to interview him, and he would just tell them, no, get on out of here, catch a train, whatever you need to do, get out of here because I'm not going to talk to you. And so there were people came from all over the United States to talk to this guy, and it was a dog and pony show at the sheriff's office for a while. Then he says, Lane, he's on the gurney. They're going to have to send him to Fort Worth because he'd done so much damage. They couldn't fix it there. He lived through it, obviously. They stopped the bleeding, but they had to send him to Fort Worth, to JPS, to get him sewed up properly. So he said, Lane, know all those guys who were here talking to me about those murders? And I said, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, Robert. I know what you're talking about. And he said, will you tell them, as long as I'm in prison, there will not be any more of those murders? And which was quite a revelation to me. I was thinking he was probably involved because we could put him in the place of all these murders, and it's kind of odd. And his workplace took him to those places. So I went out, and there was a task force going on in Missouri, and I called those guys when I told them what he had said to me during the darkness. And you could hear the cheering in the background. So, okay, this is the guy. And he told me, Robert told me, he said, if you come see me after all of my appeals are done, I'll tell you the whole story, tell you the names, tell you the locations, I'll tell you everything. I wanted to get it right then, but he wouldn't do it. So he went about his way. He got sentenced to life and still in prison now. But what happened was that I went and visited with his girlfriend, and I took all of his clothes because I was thinking maybe we could get some DNA tied back to some of these murders. And he found out about that, and he got mad and wouldn't talk to me because I went to visit with his girlfriend. So he never told me anything about it. And so that's what that book is about. Again, both available on Amazon. It's set right here in Wise County. It's called a sequel. I learn these things when I write books. It's a sequel. The people who are in East Texas are basically now in here in Wise County, which is kind of, I don't know if you'll know, it's kind of north central Texas.
Well, listen, any more questions that you have, Miranda and Grace? No? Well, listen, Lane, we really appreciate you being here with us on this show, and I want everybody to go out and get his books and read them. Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. That's www.chicagoschol.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who always participate in these episodes. We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at criminologychatspodcast@gmail.com. That's CRIMINOLGYCSPODCAST@gmail.com. And also, please check out our YouTube channel at https://www.youtube.com/@Criminology Chats Podcast. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post-production services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'm JR Rainbolt, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers of the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers of the Chicago School.